Hey everyone, welcome back to another reaction video. We are diving back again into the well that is the Ruby Franke and by connection Jodi Hildebrandt story. And as we've gone through the different episodes, is what it feels like of this crazy story, is that Jodi Hildebrandt, from what we've heard from her niece Jessie and just from the other reports that are coming out, is that Jodi Hildebrandt really is the mastermind behind the abuses that we're hearing about, not just with the Franke family, but really typified by what's going on with them. And so another victim of Jodi's has started to speak out now. This is Adam Steed, who went to her for counseling with his family back in the early 2000s and decided to speak up when he was hearing what was going on with the Franke family and how Franke is trying to discredit her children so that their testimonies won't be taken seriously against her. So while this is a painful story to watch, again, I'm willing to take that dive with you all. I am so encouraged by the empathy that we see in the comments as we've talked about in previous videos. And so let's dive into this story. Let's see what we find.
Adam Steed says he went to Jodi Hildebrandt for counseling because he needed help, but she betrayed his trust and now he's here to tell his story. Hildebrandt owns Connections Classroom, a business that offers counseling for couples and individuals along with coaching for businesses. Franke worked with Hildebrandt at Connections. Prior to Connections, Hildebrandt worked as a therapist, treating people who struggled with addiction to drugs and alcohol.
So it's just a review right now. We know all of this.
A man named Adam Steed. Steed says he was sexually abused by someone with the Boy Scouts of America when he lived in Idaho as a child. He then moved to Utah. He became married, and that's when he met Jodi Hildebrandt. When did you first encounter Jodi Hildebrandt?
My Mormon bishop asked me to go, me and my wife to go to her. I had just finished passing the statute of limitations in Idaho for criminal and civil sexual child abuse. They had this bizarre statute for 5 years. And I had changed that with my dad and a lot of people that we had done a grassroots movement together. And I moved down to Utah, and I had just finished a settlement case with Boy Scouts of America. And then, like, immediately afterwards, my bishop asked me to go to Jodi Hildebrandt with my wife for therapy.
Adam Steed says,
Okay, so the background with this guy, Adam Steed, is that he was abused, and what he said was that he worked with his dad in a grassroots movement to change the laws in Idaho around what it looked like child abuse. And then when he got married, this is a pattern that's shown up as we've looked into the story of Jodi Hildebrandt, is that there was a lot of backing from the Mormon church. And so he's saying his Mormon bishop recommended that he and his wife go to see her. Not sure yet exactly why they were told to see her, but from his report, they were just run-of-the-mill couple and they were told to go see her. So let's see how that turned out.
Yeah, just normal marriage issues. Outside the fact there was a lot of stress on our marriage because we had done a settlement for child abuse with Boy Scouts of America, and we were having we had a 1-year-old baby and we had a newborn coming along, and we were both in school at Brigham Young University trying to do all of our credits, and my ex-wife had some issues as well that were kind of difficult, and I had trauma from what happened to me in the past, and we were just trying to be normal people and live a normal life.
Wow, just think about all of the different stresses that he was facing in that period of time. First, the trauma from his childhood abuse, moving Idaho over to Utah, being newly married, having young children in the house, being in school. All of these stressors probably made him and his wife very vulnerable to whatever Jodi Hildebrandt was going to say. When you are dealing with newborns, dealing with school, just moved, dealing with trauma of your own, if anyone tells you like, oh, you just got to do this, you just got to listen to me, you just got to follow me in order to live your best life, in order to be done with all this stress, that feels like a lifeguard throwing a life preserver to you. You are going to latch onto that. And so they were in a very vulnerable spot, very ripe for being abused in that kind of power dynamic.
and have a beautiful life after some of the things we've gone through. It's hard for me to talk about this stuff because it's so traumatic.
What year was this that you were being counseled by Jodi Hildebrandt?
2008. We just finished the scouting settlement. I think I had the psych evaluation for the damage it had done to me somewhere in like the late fall. And then I think around Christmas or winter or something, we had settled this case, or somewhere in the early January or February. And I think it was in April that I had started therapy with Jodi Hildebrandt, a group therapy with Jodi Hildebrandt, with me and my wife.
How did the counseling start? Did it seem to go well at first, or were there red flags right away?
I will tell you a story that Jodi Hildebrandt's more sophisticated than a normal person in a lot of ways. She evolved into what she became.
And we heard this from Jesse as well. Jodi Hildebrandt was not just your run-of-the-mill person who got on a power trip. A lot of this stuff was calculated. She was charismatic, smart in a way about the way she went about things and about protecting herself from any pushback from clients who had been abused by her. And so we're seeing this play out again, even as early as 2008, Adam saying, she's charismatic, she knows how to get what she wants, and she's able to mask that really well. And people talk about her having a personality disorder. Whether or not that's the case, when you do run into people with personality disorders, a lot of times they are very charismatic up front. And it's only later on that you begin to see those red flags, you begin to see the signs where, okay, something is off here, something is not right.
She would put us in a phase 1. There's phase 2 and phase 3 of the particular group she was in at the point. And phase 1, it wasn't very intense. It was lighthearted and fun. And, think of like a PG movie or something, and a lady that's just charismatic and fun and teaching these principles about delusion, denial, and all this kind of stuff. Codependency, using small examples in people's lives where they didn't realize they were in this state, and the whole room laughing about it. That was phase 1. And it was, couples, all happy couples thinking they were with this incredible lady. When she separated.
Man, now that he's describing this and knowing what I've heard from the Jodi Hildebrandt interview, a lot of it does seem very cult-like, where she's bringing in couples with some kinds of concerns. And at first everything seems great. You're in a community, you belong, you have this common shared language that she's teaching them. And then I think what we'll probably find later is that she'll probably start using that belonging in the group, the threat of exile, the threat of being cast out, as a way to keep people in the fold, as a way of scaring them, or even using the information that they've trusted her with as a weapon against them.
The couples and all women and all men groups, then after she gained everyone's trust, then really bad things began to happen.
I want to say really quick, when he says after she gained everyone's trust, that's when really bad things begin to happen. I talk about this with trust with my clients a lot. When you do trust somebody, that is when you are vulnerable with them. You are giving them the opportunity to hurt you. And the idea with trust is that you are trusting them not to do that. And so she was really sinister in the fact that she was able to gain their trust and make them feel like everything's above board, everything's great, she knows what she's doing, and she's a good therapist. And then when they start opening up, that's when she finds those vulnerabilities to really drill into and take advantage of, which is so antithetical to what building trust in the counseling relationship is supposed to be about when you talk about non-malfeasance, doing no harm.
My case is that when I chose to leave this cult-like group, Jodi tried to punish me. And she worked through BYU Honor Code Office and legal measures to try to hurt me. And I have.
Okay, I know I'm pausing a lot, but there are just so many ethical problems going on in this story that he's telling. First, that she's aligned with the college, so she has a lot of institutional backing. That's a lot of power in her court in the first place. And then to wield that as a retribution when he's trying to leave, that is against the value of autonomy that counselors should hold for their clients. If I'm your therapist and you decide to leave, I may disagree with the reasons, but I don't get to say, you have to stay with me. I don't have that kind of control. And for her to try to hang on to people and keep them from leaving, even when they want to, against their will, that is so wrong. And you should never get that kind of feel from your therapist.
The emails between my ex-wife and her planning out all this stuff, talking about what the real issues in our marriage were, and then them evolving that into something drastically different with allegations that would totally destroy your life. And
again, I apologize. I know I'm pausing this a lot, but what he's talking about here is triangulation. When you're working with couples, it's something to be aware of for counselors, that sometimes because of our own biases or beliefs or the way we're interpreting the situation, we might start thinking one person is the problem. And so we start taking the side of the person who we think is in the right. And this is something that therapists have to be very aware of and very careful about, because that can alienate the person who is left out of that triangle. So you think about like two people pointing at them, that's triangulation. What happens then is that it becomes one person's problem. It's not a couple level problem anymore. It's just, oh, if this problem person will change, then everything will be fine, which is rarely the case when it comes to a marriage.
And how that evolution happened from what they originally were like is just astounding. I had to come forward because when I heard that they were doing the same thing to those little kids that they did to me to hide their crimes, it was totally predictable. And I knew my records would just completely show the world the truth of how dangerous this lady really is. And clients that are close to her that are probably not really good people in the first place, but that she enhances their abilities under her guidance to do incredibly criminal things.
Adam claims that Jodi Hildebrandt conspired with his then wife to accuse him of sexually abusing their child.
I never had the courage to talk about this openly because the damage was so bad. After Jodi and my ex-wife got done trying to make me look like a child abuser and a sexual addict and a rapist and everything else, having been a victim that came forward to change the laws to protect children, and having the insecurities that victims have, the stigma and all that stuff, and Jodi working on me to try to make me look like I was a predator. In her final stage, when I refused to pay all the money and refused to stay in the group and was so uncomfortable with it, what they did to me, the coordinated attack to create the solution and all the stuff, I have all the documentation and these fine, I mean, I'm Jodi coaching my ex-wife in fine. I'll share that in this other interview, the exact words as she coaches her through how to make people think that they're coming up with the idea themselves, when she's trying to contort people's minds into thinking that there had been abuse and violence. And
a couple things to take note of. Just feeling the betrayal that he's talking about with the therapist that you're trusting your marriage and your life with, to be working with your ex-wife, to turn her against you, to turn your kids against you, to turn the perception of your reputation into being an abuser and a rapist like he's talking about. That would be traumatic for anybody. And then, like you said, the way that Jodi went about it, also sowing doubt into his own sense of self-worth because of all of these accusations, and probably the way that people in his community are seeing him now, to make him powerless to speak up against her. And then for Jodi to also be coaching his ex-wife in exactly what to say so that you can elicit the response that you want, get people to say what you want. That is such a twisted way of applying the skills that we learn in therapy. When we reflect, when we try to clarify what clients are trying to say, we are trying to get them to understand what their own beliefs are, how they see offense, how they are interpreting things, and how that shapes their response to things. We're not trying to twist it to, oh, this is how you should see it. This is my version of events and you have to frame it that way. That is such an abuse of the power and the skills we train for.
When you start to see this evidence of what the real issues were, what Jodi's agenda was, how she went about it, and the documentation for it, these people will be hung. I mean, the game's over. And these little kids that, that they're accusing of abuse, sexual abuse right now, to hide their crimes, that's just an old MO. And
so
I'll be
what
able to
Ruby
prove
said in court that day about one of her children sexually abusing other children and then people in the neighborhood, you're saying that's the same thing that Jodi tried to do to you?
Well, not just to me, to probably hundreds of people.
Wow.
And there's going to be so many victims coming forward with the same story. A story that if you told it on your own by yourself, everyone would think you're weird and creepy. But when 100 people come forward and tell the exact same story, and that's why Jodi's they're trying to act sick and speed up the hearing, is they don't want this complicated thing to materialize and then show this incredible crime.
Adam Steed said he went to counseling sessions with Jodi Hildebrandt for 6 months, and then he stopped. He described a rigidity in Hildebrandt's counseling style. For example, Steed claims Hildebrandt became upset if men looked at something like the swimsuit issue of Sports Illustrated, likening it to pornography. Once he tried to leave her counseling session, Steed said things got ugly.
She was just contacting, like she didn't want me to leave her therapy group. And she had my wife send an email message to me of the terms so that the marriage wouldn't end. And it included that I had to go back to Jodi. I had to pay for, it was thousands of dollars a month. That I couldn't go to any other therapist. I was trying to go to other therapists because they were saying I was an addict in denial. And, it was just crazy. Jodi, in her group, she said that if you had to spend time not thinking about something, just the fact that you had to not think about it meant you were an addict. I mean, she brought everybody in.
Yeah, so this idea of not thinking about something or trying not to think about something, first of all, I haven't met a client who can feel like, oh, I'm anxious about this, I'm just not going to think about it. That increases the power of whatever you're trying to avoid. It's called the avoidance cycle. If we're avoiding something, it's because we think it's to be feared, and so we avoid it. That gives us a temporary relief. The next time it rolls around, we have this other experience of, oh, I avoided it last time because it was scary. That builds up that fear a little more in our minds, and we keep avoiding it, and then that builds us up to be some overwhelming burden that we are constantly trying to navigate, constantly trying to work around and not look at and not think about. If someone were to actually follow Jodi's philosophy in doing that and trying not to think about something because that would mean that you're actually addicted to it, the addiction would probably end up getting worse. The anxiety would probably end up getting worse. The guilt on top of all of that, because now you think you're a terrible person, would probably exacerbate that all the more. I think it's fairly clear at this point, but this lady was not doing real therapy.
She was saying I was mentally unhealthy and I couldn't choose for myself because of how unhealthy I was. I couldn't choose to go to another therapist. This was my addiction working to not receive the confrontation that she had. And, she just, y'all, this is just so hard to talk about. Like, I'm trying to give a condensed, quick version without sharing all these dramatic files that are the complete evidence of who this lady is and what she is. But the short version, she wouldn't let me leave therapy.
Adam Steed says Jodi Hildebrandt violated his trust when she shared information about his counseling sessions without his permission. Documents we obtained from the state of Utah show Hildebrandt's license was suspended for a time in 2012. and that she admitted to discussing a John Doe's clinical diagnosis without his permission with clergy and 2 other mental health therapists.
You don't do that.
The documents also say that Hildebrandt admitted to doing this, and that she also shared information with administrators at the John Doe's University. Steed says he is the John Doe listed in these documents.
Okay, I hope everyone at this point can get on board with saying you do not do that. Protected health information, PHI, is the basis of confidentiality. You cannot share a client's identifying information without their consent, their written and signed consent. So I have a form in my office. If someone wants me to share information with, say, a doctor, right, they need to identify the office or the name of the doctor that I'm talking to and exactly what about their case I can share. A release of information does not give me just free license to share whatever I want. And then unless otherwise specified, that document expires in a year. So yeah, that's a complete betrayal of trust and the foundation of confidentiality that counseling is founded upon. If you can't trust your counselor to keep the details of your case to themselves, then who would feel safe talking about their addictions or their mental health concerns or just the difficulties that they're having in their marriage? There'd be no trust at all in the profession.
Jodi Hildebrandt's counseling license is listed as active. Adam Steed says
he
believes more people will come forward with stories about Jodi Hildebrandt.
I just want to say that to any victims out there that have had their lives destroyed by Jodi Hildebrandt, or any of this kind of stuff, I just want you to know that you need to have courage and come forward and talk about it. You're not alone, and it's super traumatic, but if you talk about it, after a while, the trauma will go away and you will live in a much more beautiful life for you and your family and your children and for everybody in the future. And I'm now actually pretty happy, other than just sharing this like re-traumatized, terrible, dark chapter of life that happened. And the world needs to know it, because Jodi Hildebrandt's doing the same thing right now with these kids that she did to me.
Yeah, the whole MO behind the way that Jodi Hildebrandt isolated people and destroyed their reputations was to make them feel alone so that they didn't feel empowered to speak up. And Adam Steed is completely correct that he regained his sense of efficacy and he felt empowered to speak out. Just like going back to the grassroots movement that he and his dad did to change the laws in Idaho around child abuse, there's power in multiple people speaking out for what's right. And that's not to say it's the responsibility of these victims to be speaking out so that she can be brought to justice. I think that can help, but again, I think it bears saying that a lot of the systems that backed Jodi, whether in her place of authority within the church or just within society as a mental health professional, a lot of those systems failed these victims. And I want to acknowledge that. I don't want to put it on the victims to have to set things right. And he's right too. Again, talking about that avoidance cycle, that plays a huge part when it comes to trauma and PTSD. The more we avoid the trauma, the more powerful it becomes and impactful it becomes in our lives. And a lot of therapies revolve around becoming comfortable sharing your story of trauma, just telling it over and over again so that it loses the power that it has over your entire life. It may never go away completely, but I can see what he's saying there, that telling the story has its own power for you to own your life and for you to own that story instead of it owning you and controlling your narrative. I think my final note on this is that, like with Jodi Hildebrandt, I really want to honor Adam Steed's courage in speaking out, putting himself out there, reopening some of the wounds and some of the nastiness that he experienced from his ex-wife, from Jodi Hildebrandt, and putting that in the public for the well-being of these kids who are now suffering the same thing. I think it shows a lot of courage. I think it shows a lot of the work that he's done to feel empowered in this situation and not to feel defeated and not to feel like he's just been beaten down, which he has been by all of these different things that have happened to him. So thank you all for tuning in. This is a very sad series of events, and I don't know how much longer I can keep up with this story. There are just so many things coming out left and right as people start to speak out, and I think that's great, and just the rate of trying to keep up with that is a lot. So thank you all for tuning in. I really do appreciate your thoughts as we continue discussing some of the mental health pieces around this topic, about how counselors should conduct themselves, about how therapists should be actually doing therapy, and honoring the values within the counseling profession. So as usual, please like and subscribe. That helps us to create more content for you all. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time.